Welcome back to Lifespark, the podcast investigating health crises and uncovering innovative solutions to tackle them. I'm Conrad, co-founder at Lifespark, and with me is my cousin and co-founder, Jack.
Hi, everyone. At Lifespark, we empower people to take control of their health, including fertility, longevity, and wellness. Here, we dive into the stories, science, and strategies shaping the future.
Joining us today is Dr. Mark McDonald, board-certified psychiatrist and author of United States of Fear, an uncensored voice on societal psychology and medical freedom. We're excited to talk fear's grip on health choices, the biology of chronic stress, and how reclaiming mental resilience transforms our lives. To start, Dr. McDonald, can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what your mission is?
Well, I'm a child psychiatrist by practice, but I do see adults as well. And I've been working with them for about 15 years. I started off working actually in a jail system in the Valley, the Desert Valley in California, with pre and post adjudicated youth. And from there, I moved on to a private practice in West LA, where I now treat patients primarily through medication, but I also have some lingering therapy patients from my early years. I used to do child therapy, family therapy, couples therapy. Now it's primarily medication management. But what I've shifted into in the last, I'd say 4 years, and certainly the last 2 rather rapidly, is an augmentation in my treatment approach that focuses not just on medication, not that it ever did. I always discussed sleep, diet, and exercise, but with actual real substitutive therapies that include very specific plans of action, not just go out and exercise, eat healthy, and sleep, because everybody kind of knows that, but exactly how to do that, what tools to use, what to put in your body, what not to put in your body, what specific types of exercise is helpful, what is sleep hygiene, and how does it work? And what on earth are all these microdosing supplements for, and are they safe and effective? So I'm going into a lot of very specific detailed planning in the way that a doctor would, well, still should, but doesn't very often, with actual medication dosages and prescriptions, but I do it outside of just the pharmacy realm only. And so I think I have a much broader approach, and I'm really here about education, educating patients, and also through my writing and speaking. I have an online posting blog forum on dissidentmd.com where I post health and non-health related articles every week. And I also am co-host of my own podcast called Informed Dissent with Dr. Jeff Barkey, whom you know, where we discuss things that range from politics to health, supplements, exercise, diet. I also, as you mentioned earlier, published a couple of books in the last few years, United States of Fear, and then subsequently the Freedom from Fear, which was a psychological analysis and approach to explaining and overcoming fear as a weapon to control people, which I believe has been very effective in the last few years and has unfortunately led to a very rapid and spiraling decline in physical and mental health. The U.S. is now going down in actual years of age lived for the first time in history.
Dr. McDonald, as you mentioned, fear is a central theme in your work. Was there a defining moment or experience that shaped this?
Well, it all started in spring of 2020 when we were told to be afraid, to be very afraid, to stay at home, to not go near human beings, to wear masks, and ultimately to inject our bodies with experimental gene therapies that neither helped us medically nor helped others medically, and led to a great degree of acute and now going on chronic illness, disease, and actual death, down to not just children, but also infants in the womb, many of whom have died after their mothers were injected, sometimes coercively and forcibly, with a toxin that injured and killed their newborns. So that process that began of telling us that we're so scared and that if we don't follow orders, we're going to die, and eventually we're going to kill other people too in the process, I think was probably, I shouldn't say probably, as far as I know, it has been the greatest and most successful worldwide campaign to control people in human history, all based on lies, fabrications, exaggerations, and embellishments. And that process really shifted my worldview, and it led me to confirm a suspicion that I've had for a long time, which is that human beings suck. As a group, we're pretty bad. We're really full of it, and we really do a lot of evil. I love individual humans, but as a species, as a group, we really do more harm than good. And I think that because we can't be trusted, I think the best solution to limiting harm is to limit the ability and power of any individual or group of people to attain control and dominance over us. I think that the balancing effect of having flat, parallel, contiguous voices that are all equally powerful as much as we can, while we, of course, have to operate with some hierarchy, otherwise it's anarchy, I think is really the best approach to solving most of our problems. Because when we allow concentration of power, as we did in 2020, to take over, really, really bad things happen, and real evil becomes unleashed on us.
In your book, The United States of Fear, you state that fear rewires our behavior. How does this apply to everyday health decisions, like trusting how we feel versus relying on institutional mandates?
Well, I think it's a confluence of factors. What you just proposed, which is that there's an institutional oversight / control / enforcement mechanism and vehicle that we never really had, other than, public health, which of course was activated in emergencies to help protect people who couldn't get access to and couldn't make good decisions to get good care and act on behalf of themselves and others, which became weaponized really as a way to accrue power and influence, which has nothing to do with public health. I think is layered on top of another problem, which I think is really, I kind of explained this in my book and then later in my talk since then, that the ability to weaponize fear really occurred through new technology. It's not that people suddenly became evil. We've had evil since the dawn of time. We've had Anthony Fauci's, and we've had World Economic Forum leaders and Klaus Schwab's and George Soros's throughout even folklore. You hear myths and stories about monsters that arose before even the written word in human history. What differs now, and this is very recent, is the ability of technology to weaponize their power and the fear that they can instill in people. Specifically, I'm speaking about social media and the ability to concentrate and curate information / news and disseminate it literally into our pockets on cell phones that don't even require us to open up a newspaper and sit down and read and reflect and have coffee, much less, televisions and iPads and billboards up and down the streets that just rotate new ads every day that can be switched in seconds from a remote service channel way up on the other side of the state. I'm referring to campaigns, for example, that cropped up a couple years ago to press forward the so-called Saluna Bright Life Kids Health Initiative, which is a $3.2 billion health initiative that comes out of the coffers of the state of California in Sacramento, that has advertised life-saving communication and health and support through your cell phone on an app for children all the way up to age 18 and beyond, which is accessible to anybody in California that has a cell phone, even if you're 5 or 6 without parental consent. And this app, this band of brothers is led by and controlled by a transgender activist community, most of whom create forums that are outside the purview of parents in cell phones and the apps for children to explore their feelings and to essentially encourage them to change their gender and to take hormone drug injections and to castrate themselves. And to castrate themselves without parental consent. That is the whole philosophy of this Bright Life Saluna program that came out of the UK. So that's one example of how technology and the ability to hide truth and information from the vulnerable, like children, has led us to lose sight of what is real, what is provable, what is able to be discussed openly. And I think without that one element of technology, specifically social media, I really don't believe that what we suffered between 2020 and 2022, and of course, reverberations are ongoing, I don't believe it could have happened in a generation ago. I really don't.
So, Dr. McDonald, from your clinical experience, you've touched on a couple of these. What are the most common mental health issues arising from a culture dominated by fear, and what can individuals do to recognize these and combat these effects in their own lives?
Well, I think the number one problem is isolation. You see a huge increase now in young people who express autistic traits, and they're not necessarily neurologically damaged children. Some of them are, and I think that's largely because of pollutions, toxins, problems with mutations, genetic development. A whole confluence of issues is leading to a rise of true neurologic autism. But behavioral autism, people who are just unable to express themselves through words, to communicate and have discussions face to face, that communicate only through apps using emojis, almost like hieroglyphics, eggplants and cucumbers, and happy faces because they can't use their words. And these are not 2-year-olds. These are teenagers. That is a problem that we've never seen before. And this is doubly dangerous because when people are isolated, then the only influence that they have in their life is what comes out of their phones and out of their computers. So their parents become less important. Their friends and social circles become less important, unless it's, of course, through the app itself. The influence of video games, violence, pornography, sex trafficking, prostitution online through things like OnlyFans. Most of my female patients have OnlyFans accounts, and these are children and junior high school girls, often making money, thousands of dollars a week in some cases, to purchase jewelry, Fendi purses, perfume, trips to Mexico through cash that they get on their phone by prostituting themselves to strangers online who eventually could end up meeting them in person and kidnapping them. This is, I think, the dead end of where we're heading through social isolation. And I think the way to reverse this is to encourage as much in-person, face-to-face interaction as possible. That's not just in the home, but also in the schools, in sports, in theater, in music, in drama, in reading circles, in parks, in museums. We lost that. We lost that in 2020. It has not come back. And we have substituted a life today, by and large, from children to adults, that is almost entirely remote. If you go to a coffee shop, you don't even have to speak to someone to get your coffee now. You can order your coffee 20 feet away from the cash register on a kiosk, and then you can pick up that coffee on a counter where you don't even see the person who made it or the person who offered it to you when your number is called, usually by a robot. This is happening at all level of service in our society. You can get food delivered to your house where you don't even see the driver, much less the person who prepared it, dropped off on your doorstep that you can order on an app. This is not the way our lives used to be. And the more we disconnect from people, the less we understand about what other people are doing. Who are the workers that were called the essential workers in 2020 to 2022? These were the people who were doing all the things I just described that we never saw, right? We never saw them. They had to go to work. They had to, quote unquote, risk their lives for us, those who were sitting behind our desks and our computers doing all our work remotely. So essentially the scam of the last 4 years was really medical. The medical scam was really just a subterfuge to institute class warfare, the haves and the have-nots. And I don't mean poor and rich. I mean those who have access to education and technology and those who actually have to perform manual labor. It's not so much about money. It's about pure elitism. And I'm very concerned that this social isolation that I just described, this physical separateness that we've now redefined as our lives, is leading to a permanent entrenchment of worldwide elitism, where we have a small number of people who are protected from reality and the costs of the decisions that they make personally and politically from everyone else that is actually having to live in the filth and the suffering, the degradation that they've imposed on them. The one exception recently, which is somewhat, I guess, a silver lining in a dark cloud, is the destruction of 20,000 residences here in Southern California through a horrible fire that wreaked havoc in Pacific Palisades and Malibu, due exactly and completely and entirely to the consequences of political decisions that most of the people who lived there supported in their voting. It was not an act of God, it was an act of man, and it was a catastrophic failure. And this is the first time that in my lifetime that this many people en masse have suffered so tremendously due to their own consequences of their decisions. And this may be a wake-up call for Southern California. I certainly hope that there's other wake-up calls that occur that will allow us to revisit this elitist split-off that we've been engaging in the last 5 years and return to more of a sense of interaction and normalcy, which requires us to be part of a community of humans once again.
And speaking of community, so the concept of safetyism suggests an overemphasis on safety that can lead to unintended negative consequences. And when I read this made me think of Mark Zuckerberg, who recently was on Joe Rogan, and he spoke through the spectrum of moderation on Meta, where the more you moderate, the more bad stuff you take down, but there will also be consequences of banning folks who, aren't spreading misinformation. Do you think safetyism is getting better or worse online?
Well, it was getting much, much worse until the election in fall of 2024. And now it's improved rapidly and substantially. I wrote in my book, United States of Fear, and also in Freedom from Fear, that we must abhor the worshiping at the altar of safety. We used to worship at the altar of freedom. And freedom is something you have to fight for. It has to be learned. It's not natural. Our natural inclination is to be taken care of. That's how we were born. We were taken care of. That's what we learned very, very early. We have to replace that with a desire to put ourselves in uncomfortable positions and take risks in exchange for our freedom. There's a price that you have to pay for freedom, and part of it is responsibility, and the other is lack of utter and total control. Marxism, the whole leftist ideology that started in the early 1900s with Vladimir Lenin and Karl Marx, is based on an understanding of human psychology, partly envy, but also partly that people are really scared of freedom. They want to be taken care of. And the answer to that is a system in every case, whether you want to call it Marxism, socialism, communism, anything with an ism is probably part of this, that asserts that it's possible and that we will make it possible because we're better than you, we know more than all of you, to eliminate all of the unknowns from life. And that's what Mark Zuckerberg is trying to do, or at least he was trying to do until recently with his Facebook and now Meta program that will eliminate all of the uncertainties. Truth versus untruth, comfort feeling induced messaging and emojis versus those that make you uncomfortable. The idea that there's a way for an individual or group of people to curate life, whether it's on social media or our day-to-day walking around town, that will eliminate all uncertainty and all risk is the basis of safetyism. It's a basis of this false god and worshiping at the altar. Now, it sounds lovely. It sounds like we're back in the womb. Mommy's taking care of us. We don't have to do anything. We just sit there and everything happens, sort of like being plugged into the Matrix. But as we all know from the Matrix movies, there's an incredible cost that comes to that. And at the extreme end, it's a complete disconnection from reality. As these beings were locked in the Matrix, they lost all sensory input to where they were. Everything that they lived was pumped into them, not just the fluids and the nutrients, but their actual thoughts and experiences. And that's where we were heading until very recently. Those virtual goggles that were advertised by Mark Zuckerberg that crashed, they cratered about a year ago, no one wanted them, was another step in that direction. I think safetyism is a weaponization of an intrinsic need that all human beings have to be protected. And it has to be fought. It has to be fought individually at every turn possible, because the price that you pay for it is incremental and it ultimately leads to nothing but slavery and death and destruction. There is no exception that I am aware of in human history where the pursuit of safetyism through socialism, Marxism, communism, despotism, globalism, internationalism, whatever you want to call it, no exception in human history where that has led to a good end rather than human suffering and death.
You've written about chronic stress and as a societal toxin. What does the science say about how prolonged stress or anxiety damages the body at a more cellular level?
Well, this is one area where there isn't really much dispute. Cancer is primarily an end-stage product of chronic inflammation, which is ultimately caused by stress. Now, this stress can come in many forms. It can be emotional stress. It can be social stress from isolation, lack of stimulation. It can also be from the stress of toxic chemicals put into your body. The most common one, actually, surprisingly, is sugar. Sugar is one of the most pro-inflammatory compounds that we can put into our body, that we can ingest. And it's very clear from all of the research in the last 3 to 5 years, if not earlier, that the degree to which inflammation increases in the body is markedly correlated to the amount of sugar one puts in one's body. So if you think about the sort of the big picture here when it comes to health and food, our food supply since the 1950s has been increasingly dominated by high sugar and high processed foods that have very, very low or minimal nutrient density. And that is now, although it is arguable, I think it's pretty strongly arguable on one side, that is the primary driver of obesity and all forms of chronic disease, particularly in the pediatric population in the US today, which is now 30% obese. The general population is 60% obese, and children now down to the age of 6 are being told by the government that the first standard of care in responding to childhood obesity, starting at age 6, is an injection of a semaglutide like Ozempic or Wegovy. Not improving your food, not exercising more, not shutting down the screens, not turning off the games, but just injecting your body with something that will make you feel less hungry, which can cause gastroparesis or frozen gut, thyroid tumors. And now we're seeing cases of sudden blindness, irreversible blindness in some of the semaglutides. I mean, this is a nasty product. So I think stress in general, whether it's food stress, physical stress, emotional stress, or social isolation stress, is really the most common and the lowest hanging fruit that we can attack to improve our overall well-being. And that includes not only the psychiatric, but also the physical. And I don't think there's really much evidence currently to dispute that.
So what are the top practices you recommend to reduce that cellular level stress?
Well, in a nutshell, it's sleep, diet, and exercise. So that's not very revolutionary, but there's some nuances in that I think many people are not aware of. Let's take sleep as one example. You would think that following your natural pattern would be the least stressful way to go about your sleep practice. I'm a night owl, so I go to sleep late, I get up late. You hear that all the time. It makes me feel more energetic and less stressed versus I'm an early riser, I go to bed early. Okay, great, you do that. That sounds fantastic. Research just came out in the last year proved that that's flat out wrong. On all health markers, especially the stress marker, it is best, regardless of your natural sleep pattern, whatever that means, to go to bed earlier and to get up earlier. Even if you're a late night owl, you will be healthier if you go to sleep early and get up early. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually been proven through research. Exercise. Well, the more I exercise, the fitter I'll be, the thinner I'll be, and the better off I'll be. That's not true either. All of the research is now pointing in one direction, which is that if you exercise more than about 20 minutes a day, and that could just be brisk walking, you have very, very little additional benefit health-wise to be gained. Now, you can become more competitive athletically. You can become faster, stronger, more supple, but that has nothing to do with health. Health has to do with your state of mind, your heart rate, your longevity, prevalence of cancer, cardiovascular disease, presence of adipose tissue in the belly, fat. And those are the markers that really matter. It's not how big your muscles are or how fast you can run. In fact, 99% of us really never have to run and never have to lift weights because that's not what we do, right? So minimal movement is actually more important than frequent and rapid exercise. And in fact, just last week, I read another publication that showed that if you run really, really fast, in other words, aerobic exercise, you actually can cause more harm to your body than good. Anaerobic exercise, such as hiking and brisk walking, is far, far better for you, both in terms of weight loss and also in terms of health markers. And then, of course, there's what we put in our body, diet. And I just talked about that extensively. The diet is probably the one thing that we can control, and we never really do. We think we can work it off at the gym. But as Jason Statham said, he doesn't say a lot of smart things, but he did say one smart thing a few years ago. Your body is made in the kitchen, not at the gym. And that's true. If you just go out and walk 20 minutes a day, that's pretty good. And you can actually stay fit that way, provided that you actually eat healthy. And what does that mean? It really does mean eliminating sugar. It means eliminating seed oils. And seed oils mean things like canola, sunflower, safflower, the stuff that comes from plants primarily. And third, and very, very important, and I'm hoping that this will change in 2025 as we get rid of these products from the shelves and we start to push healthier, more nutrient-rich food, eliminate, if you can, and certainly limit as much as possible, all ultra-processed and processed foods. Meaning anything that comes in a package that has more than 1, 2, or 3 ingredients is probably not good for you. Anything that comes with one ingredient other than bags of sugar is probably very, very healthy. So that can cover bread, that can cover chips, that covers even things like hummus, which is a really healthy food. But look at the primary ingredient in boxed hummus at Trader Joe's. After the garbanzo beans, you know what it is? It's canola oil, which is a byproduct of petroleum waste that's manufactured with hexane and causes horrible inflammation in the body, as well as cardiovascular disease. If you look at the ingredient list of the stuff that you've been eating for the rest of your past life, you'll probably see that it's full of sugar, full of corn oil, and full of ingredients that you can't name that are fillers, stabilizers, homogenizers, and shelf life preservers, none of which should be in your body, all of which you can remove if you buy stuff that's not packaged and has minimal ingredients. If you do that, that will drastically improve your diet, which improves your health. So sleep, diet, and exercise, with a few of those examples I just gave, that is probably 80% of health right there. And one thing that is not on that list is wearing a mask.
And the majority of people in the US now go to the internet first for medical info before the doctor. How can people discern credible science from the noise?
That's a really, really difficult question to answer in detail. because information sources are constantly changing. And every day I get somebody who says, I don't even know what to believe anymore. I hear this group on this side telling me A, this other group tells me B, and I'm just getting stressed out. So I just want to shut off, not even listen to the news and the media. Well, I can tell you that's not a good option. The worst option is to just not get information. I never suggest that to anybody, except perhaps for, let's say, a 30-day cleanse where they just want to get it all out of their system, go to a cave somewhere. But you can't live that way. You can't live like the Unabomber. So my answer is the following, and I think this applies broadly to any information source on any subject. It's not specific, but I think it's strategically really valuable. If you're considering using a source of information, and I suggest using the same one repeatedly, as opposed to grabbing just random blurbs off the internet, which is impossible to discern or to curate. Find a few, let's say 3 to 6 information sources, go to them, find out what they wrote from 2020 to now. Pick a few examples of positions, so-called information, recommendations. We know 99% today, all of us do, what the lies were that were disseminated from 2020 onward, because the lies really ramped up after 2020. If you go back and you look at what they recommended and what they focused on, what they wrote about, and also what they didn't write about, and then ask yourself the following question: was it true? Did it turn out to be correct? I don't mean, did it turn out to be divisive? Did it turn out to be confrontational, argument? Who cares? Did it turn out to be true? And if the answer is yes, very likely what they're writing about now is also true and correct and on point. If it turned out to be a lie, if it turned out to be a avoidance of the truth, if it turned out to be something that was absent, all of the really important ancillary information that colored how you would have interpreted it at the time, they're probably lying to you now. I think that's the best way to curate information. It's to find a source and go backwards in time, because most sources don't become untrue or become true over time. They start in one path and they stick with it. As long as they've been around, they're probably going to follow that path. Doesn't mean that the ones that stuck around are still telling you the truth. I mean, CNN is still broadcasting. Rachel Maddow still has, I think, 16 or 17 listeners, down from a high of a few million, but there's still a few people that listen to her. NPR is still broadcasting. Doesn't mean anything that these people are telling you is honest, complete, true, or unbiased. So you have to be careful, not just by seeing who's been around and who people are listening to. You have to look at what they said before, what they wrote before. I think that's your best guide to the future.
What responsibility do media outlets have in promoting fear during a health crisis? And what examples have you seen of media coverage exacerbating public fear?
Well, I famously was taken up by the medical board and accused of spreading misinformation because of posts that I reposted on my social media accounts. I think the biggest one that I thought was the most obviously propagandistic was the one that was published and promoted on Facebook that was generated by the CDC, that had a picture of a beautiful young blonde woman with long hair nuzzling her hand with like a lab coat on the nose of a horse. It was published in 2021, 2022 by the CDC. And it said, "You're not a horse. You don't need to be dewormed. Get over that ivermectin and leave it to the vets." Essentially, that was information, guidance by our government, and then promoted on social media, and then also repeated throughout all of mainstream media. I saw it on the news. I saw it on NBC, ABC. They had actual newscasters reading with the blurb of the post behind it, announcing how important it is for people to listen to the government and to stop trying to kill themselves with ivermectin. The Rolling Stones took that post and actually published a fraudulent article from a disgraced former ER doctor who was an alcoholic and hadn't worked in ER for years, stating that they had this huge number of overdoses and even deaths from people who were taking veterinary grade ivermectin, and that there were gurneys filled with patients lining the halls of people who were overdosing on this horse dewormer. They had to retract that article a few months later after it was exposed that this doctor was a fraud, and that all of the so-called overdoses were actually phone calls to the CDC from people asking questions about ivermectin and whether it would be useful or not, because they had taken it and they were just worried that they might get sick. That was considered an overdose. And there were hundreds and hundreds of these calls. In the end, not a single human being, not one, died from taking ivermectin, either human or horse, and only 2 or 3 actually got sick by taking an overdose of the concentrated horse version, and all recovered from that. So that's one example of government, media, and social media all coming together to misinform Americans about a life-saving treatment that probably actually ended up killing people. Not the treatment, but the fact that people couldn't get it. And this is still going on today. You're still hearing announcements from the CDC that children at age 6 months need to be injected with some 10th booster shot of anti-Chinese Wuhan flu virus, even though children under the age of 15 never died in the United States. Not a single child, not a single healthy child under age 15 died of the Chinese Wuhan virus since 2020. And yet we're giving them injections at 6 months that cause known cardiovascular damage, brain damage, and neurologic damage, if not death. We have actually killed people. We have killed children from this so-called science and so-called proclamation that mainstream news has been repeating and still repeating. As recently as this week, I heard it on the radio. Go get your infants injected. This is still happening today. So you have to be very, very careful about what you hear on news broadcasts, the radio, and even on social media, even if it comes from the government. You can't trust these people. You have to look back and see what they said before and what turned out to be true and what turned out to be false.
I wore a Whoop strap for 2 years, and I was obsessed with my sleep score in business school. I'd wake up and my friends and I would compare, and I would be, oh, I got a red sleep score because I drank, 2 beers last night. And then I found I was much more tired, right? It was kind of the self-fulfilling prophecy. Is this rise of biohacking and wearables inadvertently fueling health anxiety? And how do we find a balance?
That's very funny you say that, because I was out walking with a friend the other day, and she got very stressed out because she started her walk, and about 2 minutes in realized she hadn't started her foot walking step count. She had to press a button, on her iWatch. And it was upsetting because now she couldn't calculate exactly how many steps she had taken. And this was a giant travesty. And then she showed me how these little circles, like green circles that fill from red to yellow to orange to green, were not filled out and not greened for the last 5 days. She had some that were like orange and red and not complete. And I said, what is all of this? Is this like some astrology chart? No. These circles have to be fully green and complete for me to meet all of my goals. I said, you're getting stressed out. This is supposed to be a health app. This is stressing you out. But she's addicted to it. It's a form of obsessive compulsive disorder. I think this is a big problem. Think about the games. And when I say games, I mean like social media games where people will get feedback if they click a certain number of times or they press a certain number of buttons, and they get all these like electronic prizes. This intermittent reinforcement drives people to behave in a very obsessive manner. And I think these health apps, even though I understand that the motivation is good, I think having all these intermittent rewards that people are getting, like, beeps and red lines when they don't do the right thing, is distracting attention away from the whole purpose of it, which is to just gather information. I think the information gathering is great, but the in real-time live interactions that are going on with these apps, almost like a cardiac monitor where your heart rate goes above 170 and starts beeping. I mean, that's what these apps are doing, but not because you're getting into the range of a heart attack. They're beeping because you're not following orders to like step enough, or you're not lying down at the right time during the day. I don't think that that's helpful. I don't think that treating human beings like they're dogs with shock collars is really the best approach to improving health. I think the ones that run behind the scenes, gather information, and then allow you to periodically check on it and perhaps receive AI-driven suggestions for how to improve in the future are far, far better than these babysitting monitors that are constantly sending rewards and punishments to you in the form of visual and verbal cues. I think it's gotten out of hand. I don't think that it's helpful anymore. And I think we need to pull back a little bit and focus on being more present and more aware of what we're doing in our environment, rather than becoming a slave to some little device on our wrist, in our pocket, or wrapped around our neck.
Totally. And sperm counts are down 60%. Testosterone's down 30%. The average man will be infertile in 15 years based on projections. How much of this can be attributed to chronic stress driven by fear?
It's really hard to know what the percentages are because it's clearly a multifactorial problem. part of it is certainly toxin based. You can see differences in sperm counts based upon how much processed food and just general toxins are in the environment, as well as what you're putting into your body through consumption of foods or so-called foods. That's clearly a factor. Another factor does appear to be lack of physical movement and exercise. We see a strong decline now in muscle strength, grip strength among younger people that we never had before, because people just aren't doing exercise anymore. And the degree of musculature also correlates with the degree of testosterone in the body. And sperm counts do seem to be driven largely by hormonal levels. So that's a second issue. Must be a correlation between male fertility and general chronic stress levels. We know that that's true in women. This is undisputed. It's almost become a running joke when you talk to an OB or you talk to a woman who went in to see an OB for fertility treatments, that when the doctor and the woman and presumably the husband are working, so to speak, really hard to try to do everything right with sleep, diet, exercise, and sex and ovulatory cycles to get her impregnated, she doesn't get pregnant. And then the moment that they just say, what the hell, we're just going to move on with our lives and not worry about having children, the next month she's pregnant again. Well, what's the difference? There isn't really any medicinal difference. There isn't any measurable health difference. It's just stress. It's just based upon her subjective experience of stress. And that does affect her ability to become pregnant. Her fertility actually is affected. So I think it's reasonable to conclude that stress, especially chronic stress in men, is affecting their fertility. And male fertility is predominantly driven by sperm count, although a subgrouping of that is actual, and this is important if you talk to fertility specialists, it's actual viable sperm. The quality of the sperm, meaning damaged sperm, genetic mutations, that also is going up. We know that that's true because that's been studied. So that's why although sperm count is a great marker for fertility, I think the larger, more important picture is fertility in general. Sexual activity, for example, has declined substantially in the last couple of decades. Young people are having less sex than ever, especially those that aren't married. I think sexual activity, fertility, sperm count, pregnancy, all of this is intertwined and all related to some degree by the idea of and the concept of chronic stress. What I can't answer and what we just don't have good figures for at this point is how much of the fertility problem is due to stress and how much is due to actual physical environmental decline and damage.
Absolutely.
Are there any supplements you personally recommend to live longer and healthier, extend your health span, and what key nutrients protect the body from chronic stress?
There's a few that I really focus on, although I'm adding and subtracting that list all the time as we get more and more research. This is a really exciting field because we're getting more and more information that we didn't have before. And so some things that we used to think were really lovely and wonderful are now turning out to be perhaps neutral or not helpful at all, and maybe even damaging. And then there are things that we didn't even consider before that seem to be really remarkable. One that I just recently became interested in and I'm pursuing now and recommending to patients, specifically to reduce stress, are non-psychogenic mushroom compounds. There's several mushrooms, and you kind of can go down the rabbit hole on this. You've got reishi, you've got cordyceps, you have lion's mane, a turkey tail. They all have different benefits, but one or more of those mushrooms does actually act as an adaptogen, meaning a sort of balanced regulatory system cycle reverser, kind of like a thermostat in terms of reducing stress, which is often managed by our hormonal levels. You can take hormone blockers, but I wouldn't recommend that. But you can take these adaptogens. Ashwagandha is another example of this that really do show measurable reduction in felt anxiety and stress levels. And I believe will start to show actual markers of improvement in health that are more objective. Something else that I recommend that everybody consider taking, whether you're a child or an adult, is high quality concentrated omega-3 fish oils. These have been shown to reduce inattention and hyperactivity in children and improve concentration in adults. This has been known for about 20 years. But they also really help people to reduce their cardiovascular damage profile. Unlike statins, which no one should take, statins only reduce cholesterol in the brain, which then, of course, reduces your neurologic prowess, causes early onset dementia, falls, memory loss, without any improvement in cardiovascular outcomes whatsoever. You can actually reduce strokes and heart attacks by taking high-quality concentrated omega-3 fish oils. It also helps kids with attention and concentration, as I said. Another one that I think is very helpful because people just don't get enough of it is good quality magnesium, which gets burned out when you exercise. It really helps reduce restless leg syndrome, especially in women, where your legs jerk and you have trouble falling asleep at night. It helps improve sleep quality in men in general because it reduces physical tension. It induces muscle fibers to relax and causes relaxation. It also helps with energy in the morning, along with creatine, which you cannot get too much of or overdose on, and it's dirt cheap. It's not just for muscle mass building. It actually helps with energy. Very, very solid. There's 200 studies that show that it does absolutely nothing bad to you, and it fixes all kinds of problems, everything from cancer to cardiovascular disease to energy, concentration, sleep cycle, hormones. I think that's an excellent supplement to take, and again, very inexpensive. So you have the adaptogens like mushrooms and ashwagandha. You have fish oils, and then you have the magnesiums and the creatines. There's a lot of others that you can consider taking. You have specific needs and you have sort of dietary issues. You don't eat a lot of really good red meat. You probably should take some capsules of beef liver, or at the very least, take some supplements that have good metals in them, magnesiums and salts and iron. But I really think you're much better off just going for a concentrated, dried, high quality beef supplement in a powder form if you're not eating a lot of red meat. That solves a lot of problems as well, especially in women who have iron deficiencies and anemias and all kinds of issues. I also think that men in particular really need to be eating a lot more high quality protein sources like red meat. If you want to increase your muscle to fat ratio, get more muscle, less fat, that's a really good way to do it. It also increases virility. It helps with testosterone. It provides a lot of basic building blocks for muscle fiber. You can't get that with a vegan diet. It's just not possible. There's so many supplements that people recommend, and I hesitate to cover all of them because some of them are very specific for individuals. So I try to focus on these core ones that I think can benefit nearly everyone, that are safe, they're easy to find and accessible, and for the most part, they really don't cost a lot. They certainly cost a lot less than going to Starbucks and getting a drive-through latte 3 or 4 times a week.
We spoke to Dr. Barkey about Zyn, and the internet blew up when he said delivery method of nicotine, not the nicotine itself, is bad for you, and that nicotine is not addictive. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't know if I agree with the statement that nicotine itself is not addictive, because no matter what delivery mechanism you use, if you stop ingesting nicotine, you do suffer a withdrawal. And that can be true with the gums. That can be true with cigarettes. It can be true with vapes. It can also be true with pills, if you just take pills that have nicotine in them. So I do think that there is a dependency and a withdrawal that occurs that's very physical when it comes to nicotine. But I do agree with the statement that the main risk, the main medical damage to your body concern and risk is actually in the delivery mechanism. Nicotine by itself doesn't cause a lot of damage to the body. It doesn't cause heart disease. It does cause a little bit of palpitations and sometimes increased heart rate, but so does coffee. And there's no indication that coffee causes cardiovascular damage or strokes or heart attacks. So I think what he's trying to say is that rather than focusing on eliminating specific substances like nicotine from our bodies, we have to focus on how they're getting into our system. Obviously, cigarettes are a terrible, terrible delivery mechanism for nicotine because they cause cancer and lung damage and emphysema. They destroy the cilia of our lungs. They cause all sorts of obstructive cardiopulmonary diseases. Bad idea to smoke. If you think you're going to switch over to just sucking on one of those vapes, you may also be retaining or adding to perhaps other problems that you didn't think you had before with just the pure nicotine. I actually would recommend people, if they want to switch from cigarettes onto something else, to actually use a gum. I mean, they're not ideal. Nothing is ideal, but certainly in place of a vape, you should be using a gum, preferably one that doesn't have sugar in it. You're probably better off just chewing it in a gum form. And honestly, if you want to get off of nicotine, the best thing to do, short of switching from cigarettes to vapes to gums, is to actually use a medication. There's 2 medications. One is called Chantix, which has a 60% remittance rate for people who want to get off of nicotine dependency, whether it's cigarettes or the vapes. Again, I'm not a big proponent of just using prescription drugs willy-nilly, but if you look at the risk-benefit profile, I'd rather somebody be on a pharmaceutical for 1 to 3 months that might cause some temporary acute harm, perhaps with side effects, but that saves them a lifetime of problems with puffing on vapes or smoking cigarettes. I'm very pragmatic in my approach. I'm not dogmatic. I'm not ideological. I'm also very realistic. I know that there's no perfect answer or solution to anything. So minimizing risk and harm is always a better approach than trying to pursue perfection. I firmly believe that the worst harm is done by the pursuit of the perfect rather than embracing the good, which is just, definitionally imperfect.
If you could change one cultural norm to reduce fear and improve mental and physical health in the next decade, what would it be?
It would be get outside. It would be leave your chair, leave your desk, leave your phone, leave your computer, leave your game system, go outside, get sunlight, walk, and talk to people. We had been doing that since the beginning of time until 2020, and we stopped doing that. And that one thing I think has led to so many problems. Our thinking, our feeling, our physical health, our way of becoming connected. We are social creatures, ultimately. And that more than anything is what drives people's happiness. It's their sociability. I don't care how healthy you are, how rich you are, how much power you have, how many possessions you own. You will be unhappy if you are not connected to other human beings in a meaningful way. On the other hand, if you have that connection, you can be sick, you can be poor, you can be powerless, but you can still be happy.
And Dr. McDonald, how can people find you to learn more?
All the things that I talked about today, I write about, I speak about, and I record regularly. And I publish everything that I possibly can that I have access to on dissidentmd.com. You can become a free subscriber to Dissident MD and have access to a lot of what I publish there. Some of it is paywalled, so you have to be a paid subscriber to get access to some of the articles I write. I also have a Facebook account, a Twitter account, which is Dissident MD, which republishes some of the excerpts and snippets of what I put out there on the website. And if you go to the website, if you want to order a book or two, you can do that as well through dissidentmd.com. And those books are called United States of Fear and Freedom from Fear, and they are available on Amazon. There's also links on my website to the podcast I have with Dr. Jeff Barkey, which we publish if you're interested in just audio stuff, which is all free, by the way. You just go and sign up on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any other podcasting platform. It's called Informed Dissent, DISSENT. You can go to Informed Dissent on your cell phone. And this is the one area where I actually suggest you use your cell phone. Go and download the podcast link for Informed Dissent, and you can subscribe to that. We talk about all these subjects and more together 5 times a month on Informed Dissent.
Awesome. I'm sure you just gained a lot of new followers. But Dr. McDonald, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming on.
Nice to speak with you both.